We've been talking about Associated Press style and how it differs from English writing. We've also talked about what makes news. What are the elements that make news something that people want to read? Now we're going to talk a little bit about actual reporting. Reporting is the writing, but it's also the digging up of information. It's finding out the information that you need in order to actually write the story. At its heart, reporting is writing. It's also a little bit of research. We'll talk about that here in just a moment. When we talk about writing, writing really is a process. So the news writing process is very specific. And people have to realize nobody gets it right on the very first try. I have students who get very frustrated when they're not absolutely perfect with their very first lead, and I have to remind them that this is a learning process and your writing becomes a memory muscle. Not even Pulitzer Prize winners get it right the first try. They have to rewrite several times. And in fact, rewriting and editing are the elements that students need to realize help their reporting, help their writing, and fine-tune them as reporters. It's all a considered process. So be prepared to edit yourself. Think about when you're writing how, if you actually made your first draft, think about how you can go back and edit to make the words sing a little bit more or make a point more specific. It's all about reconsideration each time you write. Make sure that you're saying what you mean to say. I think this is one of the things that most people have the most problem with. You know what you think you said, but you have to go back and make sure that that's really what you said. Something that happened to me once was that I was writing a story and I thought I said one thing. I left out a word. The word was not, and that totally changed what I was saying. Fortunately, I had an editor who caught it for me and averted a major disaster with the story. Make absolutely sure that your story is in AP style. And again, this is muscle memory, learning AP style and making sure that the article is in AP style. Make sure that your facts are correct and complete. This is something that, especially with young writers, they hear some information, they get really excited and they want to go out and they want to publish the story, but they don't always have correct or complete information. And complete, correct information is absolutely vital to what we do as journalists. Make sure that it's newsworthy. Too many times I've seen people come in and say, we need to do a story on X, Y, or Z, and X, Y, or Z may be kind of a fun little something, but it has no news value. And if it's a feature story, a little bit of a different story, but if they're coming in and saying, we need to publish this as a news story, it's got to meet one of those 11 definitions of what makes news, at least one of them. So we need to make sure that everything absolutely newsworthy before we actually begin writing. So a reminder, what is newsworthy? It's more than the 5 W's and the H. This is the abbreviated version of the 11. The things that we use the most in news, it has timeliness, that there's a specific time frame to it that's important to our readers, listeners, viewers. Proximity, there's a closeness to it. It has conflict or controversy associated with it, or it has human interest, or there's relevance to our specific audience. For most of us, that will be the high school classroom. How is this relevant? It could be, as I've said, a new policy. It could be something a student group is doing that might be important to other students within the community. It just needs to have one of these elements at least, along with the 5 W's and the H. So, news writing in AP style. In addition to the specifics of AP style with words, grammar, and punctuation, I'd like to remind you that AP style is past tense. It is third person for print and internet. If you are broadcast, it is present tense and third person. This is the thing that a lot of students have great difficulty learning, is to write in third person. They have to rip out the I, me, mine, you, yours, ours, etc. from their writing, unless they're writing a column. In news, unless those words are encapsulated within a direct quote, they are not used. It must be third person, not first or second. You have to remember that we use short paragraphs and a logical order. Don't forget transitions to act as bridges to go from point to point. One of the reasons we keep the paragraph short is that especially if you're working with a newspaper, think about how skinny those news columns are, and a long paragraph suddenly looks like this massive brick wall of copy that nobody wants to read. So you have to keep the paragraphs short so that they look normal inside those skinny columns. Sentence structure. This is again a problem that I'm seeing with a lot of young writers. You need to make sure that you have a proper sentence structure, subject, verb, object, and especially when you're talking at the beginning about time, you need to have the time element, the who, the what time of day, the date, and the place. Again, very essential elements to getting information out. The most important element is focus. What's the focus of the story? What is the story all about? Is it about kitten dreaming about fish? Is it a fire? Or is it a magic snag on the wall winning a baseball game? You need to figure out what the focus is, and then you can write the story. It's really difficult to write a story unless you know the focus, unless you can cognitively tell yourself, this is what this story is all about. Now, one of the things we do with focus is that we use it to help us frame the story. Without focus, please remember, there is no story. We must have the focus. Make sure that there's a point. Make sure that there's a news element. That is your focus. And then use framing to help set up the story. Bring in the details to explain what is happening, what has happened. Make sure to use a narrative device to help compose the story. And for help, I really recommend going to the Pew Research Center's explanation online. You see the link here. If you have the ability to get this film, there was a Hollywood movie called Witness that came out in the 90s, I believe, and it has a great scene. It's about a 5-minute scene of a barn raising. Not a word is spoken, but you see the story framed completely within the context of them framing the barn for the barn raising. This is the same type of element you use for framing your news story. You find all the ways that you can structure the story and frame it so that it is complete, so information is there. Again, if you can't find the film Witness, please go to the Pew Research Center's explanation. It will really help you understand some things. Now, when we're writing, the first thing we generally write is a lead, and a summary lead is one of the most commons. The lead is the very first paragraph. Sometimes, especially in a feature story, it might be the first 2 or 3 paragraphs. Especially if you're reading a magazine, you'll notice the introduction is a little longer. But in the lead, it's very important to have that news value in that very first paragraph. This concisely states what happened or what is happening. And it's very important to have that news right there at the very top of the story. Some key things you need to remember. What's the most important element? Put that first. Put that information out there so nobody questions what the story is about. Keep your lead short. Generally, a lead is 25 words or less. And if you say, wow, that's short, yes, some of the best leads are 6 words or less. So Keep it short, 25 words maximum. Make sure you have an appropriate number of the 5 W's and the H included. Please don't try to jam all 5 W's and H in a lead. It doesn't work. But pick the most appropriate ones. Which ones are the most important in this particular news story? Make sure to use active verbs. Please, 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 please don't use passive verbs. That turns people off. It makes the reader think, oh, this isn't important. So use active verbs to show the importance. If you have questions about active verbs, go online and do a Google search for a list of active verbs. There are multiple ones out there, and it's really great to use as a tool as you're teaching so the students can see what verbs to use as opposed to what verbs not to use. Make sure to stay in third person. Again, sometimes very difficult for young people who are just starting in this field. In writing your news story, once we get beyond the lead, we use an inverted pyramid format. Now, we're going to talk more about that next week, but for right now, think about it as an upside down pyramid. If you think about a traditional English story, you start with the least amount of information and build the story down to the base. In the inverted pyramid, which is news style, you start with the most important information, sometimes the shocker, and then build down to the least important information. All of this goes in a logical descending order. Make sure to say who said the information. Again, with young reporters, it's very common for them to plop some information into a paragraph and not say who said it. In news, we have to attribute the information. Otherwise, it appears we're saying it, and we're supposed to be reporting, so we're supposed to be one person removed, and they need to remember to say who said the information so it doesn't sound like it's coming from them. By the way, said is a wonderful word. According to is long. Stated is dull. So said, even though it seems repetitious to young writers, is an excellent way of attributing the information. And it is person said, not said person. If you think about it, which is more important? That something was said or who said it? So if you're writing a story, let's say about me, it would be talent said, not said talent. Again, puts the person first, it's attributing, and that said kind of becomes, after a while, it sort of disappears into the background. It's still there, it's still giving the attribution, but instead of being repetitious, the word said becomes part of the understood background. Keep it in AP style. Keep it short sentences, keep it short paragraphs. Writing the news story is not really formulaic in a sense, but it does have these rules. So use those bridges, keep the short sentences, the short paragraphs. Think about those skinny columns. Do you really want to read a huge, massive block of type? Probably not. So keep everything short so it breaks up those columns a little more. When you get to the end, when you've finished giving all the information you have, stop writing. When you run out of facts, stop writing. There is absolutely no reason to try to tie it up with a pretty bow. It's just you've finished running out of facts. This is the beauty of the inverted pyramid style, is that if your student, say, writes an article that would be 25 column inches, 1 column wide, 25 inches long, and the newspaper that day only has room for 12 of those inches, that the information is so loaded at the top that they can cut the story at 12 inches without doing any damage to the information. They can just run the story with half of it as opposed to all of it. This is news style. This is something that we're very accustomed to. One of the things that I mentioned in the note for the readings this week is that deadlines are sacred. That is something I hope that you stress to your students, is that in news, deadlines cannot be extended. Deadlines cannot be wished away. Unlike Douglas Adams, the famous author of several books, who was known to say, I love deadlines, I love the whooshing sound they make as they fly by. We can't wish that. We have to make sure that our stories are in on time or our stories don't see print. So make sure that you're following these guidelines. And again, next week we will get much more into actual writing of news stories. Oh, I forgot to say, when you finish, go back and edit. Make sure that you go back and verify that everything is correct and that it's concise and that it's in AP style.